Well, the very important safety recall that's been leaked from Specialized, and Jirian Ryder has the scoop over on his channel, and what it's got to do with is the integrated system that's related to the Specialized fork crown area. So let's roll intro and let's get into what this is all about. Well, what this recall relates to, it relates to the head stem and the way the integration cables works. And what you've got to appreciate is, unlike the good old days when we had the external cables and you had a bearing that had an intimate contact with the fork and an intimate contact with the frame, you had very little area for movement because the interfaces were more flush. You know, there's not as many parts in between the actual stem and the frame. Now what we need to have is a bearing that relates to a disc. It's like a disc with holes in it, excuse me, so the cables can go through. And this little piece, because it can have some slight movement, because there's a point where it contacts the fork, but there's no bearing on that side, and there's a bearing on the other side, it can have a slight bit of movement. And what this is doing is it's actually scouring the fork and creating a weak spot on the fork. So if you're riding along in a group ride, or you're riding down a hill, and you hit like a pretty big pothole because the guys in front of you didn't shout it out or whatever, or you just missed it coming around a corner, that extra force could make the handlebars come away from the bike, and you'd be in a situation like Vanderpoel was, where basically your handlebars in your hand, but you've got, you know, it's separated from the bike and you have no control over the bike. And of course, you can use your imagination what the outcome of that's going to be. So what Specialized are doing is they're having a recall, and they're saying that do an inspection to make sure that you see no scour marks on the fork, and if there is, then you obviously have to have your fork replaced. Now, I imagine Specialized will be forthcoming with that replacement at no cost to the operators. That hasn't been clarified yet because it's not an official release of the recall, but I would imagine Specialized, if they're going to have a recall, they'll be standing by all of those components for their purchases. Now, I've called this out on my channel before, the problems with having an integrated system. Now, we all know it looks really smick and it's neat and it's beautiful, but sometimes, you know, beauty's skin deep, and it's what's on the inside that is really important. And when you put an integrated system in, there has to be compromises, because you have a fork that's inside the frame, but you want the rear brake and the gearing mechanisms to stay outside of the fork and go into the frame. But you also need then that the front brake line either needs to go down the top of the fork, or there needs to be a hole in the fork so it can transition into inside the fork to go down to the front brake. So you inherently have to weaken the fork. You've either got to put holes in it, or or you need to suspend it away from the frame. You need to have a bearing, and then you need to make that crown bigger, and then you need to have a spacer that's got holes in it. And there's even also other problems with how much you can turn the handlebars, because the way that you may have designed it, you could actually crimp or press or cut the cables depending on how much movement and you turn the handlebars. And some of the brands have limiters built inside, which then creates another problem because they have a stop, and if that impacts on the frame, it can delaminate your frame. So there's many design compromises with using these integrated systems. Now, obviously the average buyer goes into a store, they see a bike, they go, oh look, that one hasn't got cables, that one has got cables, how much is that one? It looks much neater, I'll have that one, thanks. But what we need to realize is these integrated handlebars are fairly new, and they haven't really fully worked them all out yet. And the problem with that is different manufacturers have got different designs. Now, we may find that some designs actually perform better than others, but at the moment, unfortunately, some people are going to be beta testers. So it's pretty poor, but it's good to see that Specialized is standing by this. And if I was, my advice to anyone who's got one of these SL Specializers is to get out there, get it down to your bike shop straight away and get it inspected, because this part of the bike is probably the most dangerous part of your bike for anything to fail, apart from, you know, a front wheel failing. well, you probably have the same result. So it's a very critical part, safety part of the bike, because potentially you could die from this or seriously be injured. And it's something that you really need to take quite seriously. So if you've got one of these bikes, get it down your bike shop, get it inspected, make sure that it hasn't got this mark on it that they're saying in the recall. And there may actually be, I think Specialized are actually offering a replacement part to limit this. And while you've got it out, I'd also check for any sharp edges on that insert that goes between the bearing and the fork, to make sure it's not going to chafe or cut your cables, because if it's chafing your cables, your hydraulic cables, you could actually end up with a leak, and then you could actually have a loss of braking while you're riding the bike, which could potentially be another dangerous situation. Not so much that you may crash, but you may go sailing through a traffic light or a stop sign and the car takes you out because you couldn't stop quick enough. So make sure you get your bike checked, guys. And anyway, that's where I'm going to leave it. And if anyone's in the market for a new jersey, remember I've got my jerseys available, my Waynos Fotos jerseys, so you can check those out in the description below. And yeah, if you like that sort of thing and you're into the market for a new jersey, hit us up and I'll get the one out to you. Cheers, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next vid, guys. Cheers.